All right, my friends, time to dive back into the Bible. I'm going to encourage you today. You should be doing this every Sunday, but I'm going to encourage you to use your imagination. You are just sitting there. You're not physically doing anything while the sermon's going on, but you should be doing a lot in your own mind. As we look at the Bible text, I'm not saying use your imagination to make things up. Use your imagination to imagine what it was like to be there. Your job, part of your job during a sermon, and as we read the Bible, is to figure out, why did this change the world? Why did this change people? What was it like to be there when this happened? And if you can see that in your mind, the more you can see that, ask God for help. If it's a challenge, some of you have more exercised imaginations than others. Some of you use your imagination more than others. If that's a challenge, ask God to help you, but be doing that as we go through these things. Otherwise, sermons, no matter what I do, no matter if I, stand on my head, do a backflip, which I can't do, by the way, sermons are always going to be a little bit boring if you are not engaging in your own mind. So I just want to put that out there. I can't see how much you're engaging in your own mind because I can't look past your eyes. But I hope that you are. So do that today. Exodus, Road to Freedom. We always start out our sermons with an illustration. And the illustration during this series is almost all historical stuff from Egypt. Now, where we're at today, we are about to jump into the 10 plagues that the Lord brought on the nation of Egypt in the 1200s BC. And it's going to be exciting, but let me show you a couple things connected to these plagues, because one big question about the plagues is why? Why send 10 plagues on the nation of Egypt? Couldn't the Lord just have brought the people of Israel out with one plague? Or no plagues at all? Couldn't he have just forced it in some other way? And the answer is yes, he could have. So why 10 plagues, and why these 10 plagues? We talked a little bit last week about snakes and turning Moses' staff, being able to turn into a snake, right? And this was a thing in ancient Egypt. You've probably seen this symbol before. This is the symbol for the United States Army Medical Corps. And what do you see on this symbol? Yeah, snakes and a staff. What? Why? Well, because this was the staff of the Greek god Hermes, who was like a messenger and a medical agent, medical healer. Well, why was his symbol a snake and a staff? Because the Egyptians had snakes around staffs as one of their main symbols. That's why. Here's another symbol. This is, I don't remember what this exactly is for, some sort of medical organization. Here you can see it's actually a snake wrapped around a pole. This symbol does go back to other places in the Bible as well, later, after the Israelites are out of Egypt, but really its origins are from Egypt. Its origins are from Egyptian magicians and wizards. And we're going to see today in chapter 7, right, when Moses he's before Pharaoh and he has his brother Aaron throw the staff down, it's going to turn into a snake. What do the Egyptian wizards do? They do the same thing. Now, there's a big question here. Do the Egyptian magicians and wizards, do they actually turn a stick into a snake? I firmly believe that what was happening with Moses is that an actual stick, a piece of wood, was turning into a snake. I'm not sure about those wizards from Egypt. Egypt is another source in world history for snake charming. And this is it's kind of a beat-up video. Can't get this video to play. There we go. This is a modern snake charmer doing the snake stick trick. He wraps a cobra around a stick and gets it to stay there. There we go. This is the origin of the symbol, okay? So the question is, what were those magicians doing? The magicians were doing, maybe they actually had demonic spiritual power. I'm sure they did in some ways. Or maybe they were doing a trick. Maybe they walked around with staffs that had snakes embedded in them in some way and could at will turn those staffs into snakes. Now you'd think, wouldn't people see that? But you got to imagine, these guys are not just in a normal place. This is Pharaoh's palace. This is the temples. They are in control. There's smoke. There's lights. And we know that Satan, right, the devil, is a master of lies. A master of lies. In some sense, even the real things that Satan does are all lies. They're all tricks. Some other interesting Egyptian stuff. This is the one copy, a really cool copy of the, really cool looking copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. This is one of thousands of Egyptian magical scrolls that exist. Egypt is really dry, and so papyrus, their paper, just doesn't fall apart, even over thousands of years. It's amazing. And so this is the Book of the Dead. It contains 200 Egyptian spells. I've said this before in this series, most of our Western ideas of like Harry Potter wizards, all that stuff goes back to Egypt. It all goes back to Egypt. Magic wands go back to Egypt. Why does the Lord God give Moses a staff that can do magic stuff? Why does he do that before sending Moses to Egypt? He doesn't do that anywhere else in the Bible. There's no more magic staffs after this. Why does he give one to Moses? Because that's the language, so to speak. That's the kind of thing that the Egyptians understand. They believe in magic wands. So God gives Moses a real magic wand. This book is full of all kinds of crazy spells. Very interesting. I'm just going to read the English translation. I don't do anything with Egyptian. It's got really nice colors, actually, in some places. Amazing work of art. This is spell number 33. And there are lots of spells that we could read that are similar to this, that are connected in other ways to the plagues. But I'm going to read this spell for you. This is the kind of spells they did. The Egyptians really believed this was real. Okay? You would do some rituals and you would recite this in ancient Egyptian, and it was supposed to have power. "O you flies, which are in the interior of the earth, the enemies of Osiris," one of the Egyptian gods, "I will not let you come against me. I will not let you alight on me. I will not let you enter into me, for I am Osiris, the Lord of the two lands." The two lands is Egypt. Egypt was divided into Upper and Lower Egypt. This is a spell to control flies. So in ancient Egypt, if you had a pest infestation, you didn't call the exterminator, you called a wizard. And the wizard would come to your house and he would do magic to get rid of your flies. What does this have to do with the plagues of Egypt? One of the plagues is a plague of flies. If the Egyptian wizards can control flies, or they say they can, and then along comes someone who says, no, it's the Lord who controls everything, here's flies everywhere. What do you think the Egyptian wizards tried to do when the flies invaded Egypt? They tried to cast them out with magic powers, and it didn't work. All of these plagues are messages to the Egyptian people. Messages that all this stuff that they believed in, all this stuff that their culture had believed in for thousands of years, and what they had grown up believing was true, that none of it was actually true. The magic doesn't work. It's all a lie. The one who's in control is the Lord. In some ways, you could say the plagues, which we'll go through shortly, are it's a progression of the Lord dismantling the religion of Egypt. One piece at a time, he is tearing apart the foundation of their belief system. He's also doing it to get the Israelites out and to get the Israelites not to believe in any of that Egyptian stuff either. One last piece. This is an interesting hieroglyphic inscription picture. We've said many times Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, is almost for sure the Pharaoh of the Exodus. He's the Pharaoh that Moses and Aaron are battling with. This is an image of, on a wall at a palace, or maybe a temple in Egypt, of Ramses the Great in the center. And on either side are two Egyptian gods, the god Set and the god Horus. And Set was actually closely connected, particularly to Ramses' family. Now, Ramses is Ra. He is the god. He believed himself to be the god Amun-Ra, the sun god. Set is the god of the weather. Set is the god of thunder and lightning and hail. And Set is closely connected to his family. In fact, Ramses' dad, his name was Seti, Seti the first. So his dad was named after this other god. So closely connected to his family, god of the weather. What does this have to do with the plagues? It's not Set who's in control of hail and lightning. It's the Lord. All right. Let's jump back into our series. Just remind ourselves what we're looking at here. Exodus, the road to freedom. It is, in a sense, it is a road, a literal road that God made for the Israelites through the Red Sea to get out of Egypt. But it is also, in many ways, a metaphorical road. That God created a pathway, not only for the Egyptians, or for the Israelites to get out of Egypt, but for the Egyptians to get out of their religion full of lies. And for other peoples in the region, and for us today to follow this same road to freedom. It is a way out. In fact, Jesus himself will be said to accomplish an exodus when he dies and rises from the dead. A way out of sin, not only out of human oppression. So the Exodus, the book, is about freedom from Pharaoh, freedom from this political regime, this really evil dictator, but also freedom from sin. And so we're looking at today sort of the first battle, right? This battle is to get the Israelites out of Egypt. But the bigger battle, the thing that's going to take God himself much, much longer, is to begin to free the Israelites, not just from Egypt, but from sin. It's very clear in the book that it's the internal things going on in them that are the real problem, not even just the fact that they are slaves in Egypt. That's a secondary problem. You would think that's the big problem. That's a secondary problem. All right. A couple of reminders from last week where we were at in the story. We talked about how the Lord is very merciful and very slow to anger. So that's important to keep in mind because the Lord is about to go to war against the nation of Egypt. And you could be tempted to think, why does the Lord hate the Egyptians so much? Like he is about to just destroy their nation in 10 different ways and kill many of them. And if you had gone through that, you would think even more. How is this fair? How is the Lord for us? But the truth is, several things. The Lord has been very merciful and very slow to anger. Even in the Moses coming back to Pharaoh, right? Remember, we talked about last week, a couple weeks, we talked about the burning bush. God had appeared to Moses in the desert. He gave him signs to perform for Pharaoh. But when he goes back and he tells Moses, I'm going to do all these plagues. I'm going to just wipe out the nation of Egypt if they don't let you go. And they're not going to let you go. But he also is very patient with the Egyptians. How many plagues are there? There's 10. That's 10 chances for Pharaoh to say, okay, I'm going to go with what the Lord says. Instead of believing that I am God, I'm going to believe that he's God. He gets to decide. 10 times. And in fact, it's even more than 10. Because even before they bring the plagues to Pharaoh, the first thing God has Moses and Aaron do is just show up at Pharaoh's palace and ask him to let the Israelites go. No punishment, no consequence, no nothing. This is God acting. When he acts, he's going to act decisively. He is going to change the nation of Israel, the nation of Egypt, and the world forever through these events. But he has given so many chances for people to do it on their own. In fact, what God is doing, what the Lord is doing, is he is acting like a good father. He loves them all. Even though the Egyptians don't know him, are completely against him, and are doing very, very evil things in their nation, the Lord also loves the Egyptians. That's extremely important to grasp hold of here. He's a good father, just like you could think of in maybe your own family. Maybe it's what actually happened. Maybe you had a good father, or you are a good father. Or maybe this didn't happen in your family, and you can just imagine how it should have gone, right? A father should be very gentle and patient with their children, and yet should not just let their children keep going the wrong way. Give them lots of chances, and then the consequences have to come for their own good. This is very important. Okay, so the battle begins. Here we are in chapter 7, and now we get into the actual confrontation between Moses and Aaron and Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet." Remember, Moses is terrified, right? And Moses has, we don't know, maybe a speech impediment, maybe he stutters, maybe he can't pronounce his words properly, at least at the beginning. And he's terrified to go to Pharaoh. He doesn't think that any of this is going to work, even though God keeps telling him it will. He keeps getting worried. "You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart." We're going to talk about that quite a bit as we go through. What does it mean to have a hard heart? And who exactly hardens Pharaoh's heart? Because we're going to go back and forth in this text between, the text is going to say, the Lord hardens Pharaoh's heart. It's also going to say, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. Both of those things happen. "And though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, no matter what I do, Pharaoh's still not going to listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt with mighty acts of judgment and bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites." This is war language. This is battle language in the ancient world. For the Lord to lay his hand on Egypt means he is going to war against the nation of Egypt. And the Egyptians, and here's where we get to it. This is so important. Why is the Lord going to war against the Egyptians? Because he hates them and he wants to wipe them off the face of the earth? No, he could do that in a heartbeat if he wanted to. He's going to war against the Egyptians for this reason, that at the end of it all, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. So when we look at what God is doing with Israel, sometimes, the Bible talks about Israel so much. That is the center. They are a people who were chosen by God for a purpose in order to bring a blessing, a revelation, new knowledge about God to the whole world. But sometimes, for those of you who've been around church, you might get the impression that God kind of worked with the Israelites for a long time, and then it kind of ignored the rest of the world, and then after many thousands of years, Jesus came, and then God started to help the whole rest of the world. That is not the correct picture. Even in the very moment he is working with Israel, he is also working with the Egyptians. At the same time he is removing Israel, he is trying to show the Egyptians who he really is, and he is dismantling their religion because it's not true. He's breaking it down into pieces. So God has always been working with all people groups in the world. He has a plan, and he works with different people in different ways at different times. But he loves all people and has always been working with all nations. So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. This is essential for us to understand. This is faith. Moses is terrified. Moses is not sure this is going to work. Sometimes he's faithful, sometimes he's worried. This can't possibly succeed. I'm going to go to the most powerful ruler in the world who believes he is the sun god, and I'm going to tell him that a God he's never heard of is telling him what to do. How is this ever going to work? Moses is worried, yet Moses still does what he's asked to do. That's faith. Faith doesn't mean we never have any doubts. It doesn't mean we're not afraid. It means that even though we're afraid and even though we doubt sometimes, we keep taking steps that God has asked us to take. That's what it means. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. Yeah. Do you think you've grown too old and you've missed all the important things in your life, or your life, you haven't achieved what you thought you would? Well, Moses didn't even really get started till he was 80, and Aaron was 83, so you're in good company if that's the case. Talk a little bit about a hard heart here. A hard heart, and this is in your notes, a hard heart is when the human spirit refuses to change. It's a choice that we make. And we'll describe it a little bit more as we look at these particular moments where Pharaoh hardens his heart. But you can even see it. The way that Exodus is written is beautiful and it is profound. You can see Pharaoh's internal battle. He can see with his eyes that the Lord is really God, not him. He can see that with his own eyes. He can see in these plagues that are coming that he's not the one in control anymore. The Lord is in control. And you can see him wrestle. There's part of him that leans toward, okay, maybe I will say the Lord is God. But then another part of him wants to cling on to the lies. That's what he's always known. And those lies have brought him great power, great wealth, all kinds of things that he really is attached to. And he makes a choice in those moments. He's not sure what he's going to, and then he decides, you know what? I'm clinging to this idea that I am God. This is Pharaoh. This is what it means for Pharaoh to harden his heart. And human beings do this all the time today. That's why it's relevant for us, right? We see things, you maybe see this in other people. It's easier to see in other people than it is in yourself. See other people around you who should know a truth that's right, that's very plain to them, yet it's not what they want to believe. And so they wrestle with it, but sometimes they believe the truth and they get rid of their own false beliefs. Sometimes they cling to their own false belief, and that drags them down in their life. This is the main problem in human life. It could be said this way, is human beings choosing to harden our hearts against the truth. Continuing in chapter 7, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Now, notice here, you can gain a little bit of insight into what Pharaoh's court was like. This is a place where they believe in magic. They believe the wizards have real power. If somebody comes and challenges Pharaoh or tells him something like Moses and Aaron are saying to him, his response is going to be, okay, do something magic. Show me some magic power to prove that you are really sent by a god. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers. I keep calling them wizards because I think that gives us a sense that the Egyptians really believed that these guys had power. Pharaoh summoned his wise men and his wizards, and the Egyptian magicians, they also did the same things by their secret arts. So their magic could also turn the staffs into snakes, apparently. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake, but Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Now imagine this scene for a moment. This is where you can use your imagination and put yourself in the moment. You're in Pharaoh's palace. Everything is just huge, and there's probably, 10-meter high statues of Pharaoh around you. And there's gold everywhere. There's all kinds of soldiers and officials. There's smoke, there's lights, there's smells. It's this whole experience, Pharaoh's palace. And Pharaoh is on his throne, and he's got his great crown on his head. And what's right in the middle of his crown? Do we remember? A snake, a cobra. Pharaoh is the cobra. And he says, show me your magic power. And Aaron takes his staff. It becomes a snake. And all the wizards laugh. Ha ha ha. Yeah, you can't. We can do that too. And they throw their staffs down. And now I don't know. I suspect it was probably just a trick. What they could do in this moment. So all the wizards' snakes are now all over the place. We don't know how many, maybe 5, maybe 10 of them. So now let's say there's 11 snakes on the ground. There's Moses' snake, Aaron's snake, and there's all the wizard snakes. And all of these men watch the scene as Moses' snake, the snake of the Lord, attacks all the other snakes, kills them all, and eats them all. This is a violent moment, if you imagine what this was like. And this is not just, a minute. This must have taken quite a while for this snake to devour all these other snakes. How fast does a snake eat? This is a crazy scene. And Pharaoh, who is the snake, he is the serpent, watches this happen. What is God communicating to Pharaoh right in this moment? Before even the first plague comes, God is saying to Pharaoh, you are not who you think you are. You think you are the great serpent who can devour anybody else. No way, Pharaoh. You better start to change your mind because I can devour you like it's nothing. It doesn't even take any work for me to devour you, Pharaoh. Yet, Pharaoh's heart became hard. Notice here it does not say the Lord hardened his heart. In fact, other translations, you can translate this either way. Pharaoh's heart became hard, or Pharaoh hardened his own heart. He chooses not to believe what his own eyes are telling him. I won't believe it. I am the serpent. I'm the great one, not the Lord. I don't have to listen to him. He would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Wow. All right, now as we go into the plagues, 2 more points you can write down in your notes. And we'll just keep these in mind as we go through the plagues. We'll see how many we get through today. After the first one, we'll go through the first one in detail. After that, they are different, but they're really just a repeat in most cases. It's just chance after chance. And so they do go a little faster after we get the pattern here. The plagues are an expression of the Lord's love for Israel and Egypt. They really are. You can see very clearly how they are an expression of love for Israel. He is going to bring Israel out of slavery. They are also an expression of love toward Egypt, because Egypt also is oppressed. They are oppressed by their false beliefs. They are oppressed by the system of magic that they live under, and by this crazy system where they believe Pharaoh is a god. The plagues are the destruction of Egypt, but Egypt and Israel are to be reborn. That's the point. Not only Israel. Israel is going to go through the water, right? And the water, if you've ever been baptized or been to a baptism, going underwater is a symbol of what? Death. Israel's going to go through the water and they're going to come back up. What is it a symbol of when we come out of the water? New life. Israel is going to be reborn, but so is Egypt. So is Egypt. Their whole way of life is going to be destroyed. And in fact, I'm not going to go into a history lesson today, but the future history of Egypt, all their way of life that they've had for 3,000 years is about to come to an end. It's going to take a while. It's going to take about 75 years for the current dynasty of Egypt to collapse fully, but then it will collapse. Egypt will then be oppressed by other nations for hundreds and hundreds of years. Finally, a long time after this, the Egyptian magical system will lose its power, and almost all of the Egyptians will become Christians in the 2nd century. God's plan is a lot bigger than we can imagine. It looks like he's just doing one thing, but it's part of a much larger and longer plan. He's going to destroy Egypt, but it's going to be reborn. All right, now I will say the plagues do come in a couple of they come actually in 4 categories. 3 sets of 3. And then one that's unique. There are 10 plagues in total. The first set are the plagues of the water. This is an image from the 1800s. There were lots of European painters in the 1800s did paintings of Old Testament Bible scenes. This is James Tissot, The Plague of Blood. Hopefully that'll help you use your imagination. See what's happening here. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses. See, Pharaoh is choosing to believe in his system, in himself. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning, and as he goes out to the river, confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Every morning, Pharaoh would go out and he would get on his pleasure boat. Yes, Pharaoh had like a pleasure yacht. And you can go look this up after. It's very interesting if you're interested in this kind of thing. We actually have one that was found intact in one of the tombs of the pharaohs, one of the pharaoh's pleasure yachts. It's all gilded, and they would use poles to push this through the Nile River. Pharaoh was like, I don't even know what to compare him to, like a rock star today. He would get on this, he would get on like a rapper, like a super rich rapper. He would get on this boat with all his gold, and he would sit around there, and he would have, half-naked young women serving him, feeding him, and this is what he did most of the day, is just went up and down in the sunshine on the river, and everybody could see how amazing and awesome he was and how low and subservient they were. So that's where Moses is sent to meet him, right when he's getting onto his pleasure yacht. Okay? The Egyptian oligarch here on his pleasure yacht. And he's confronted. He takes the staff, the magic wand, so that Pharaoh will understand what's happening here. It's power that's greater than your power. Say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to say to you, let my people go, so they may go into the wilderness, worship me. Until now you have not listened. Here's what he says. Here's a sign by which you will know that I am the Lord. With this staff in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. Now remember what the Nile River is. It is the life of Egypt. Without the Nile River, there is no Egypt. It is not like saying for us, the Fraser River. Okay? The Fraser River is a cool thing we drive over for most of us, and that's about all it is in our lives. The Nile River was everyday life. It was how everybody got their food. It was the reason Egypt had food when no one else did. It was where people went every day for their water. And this lifeblood of Egypt is going to be turned into real blood. It's going to die. The fish in the Nile will die. The river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. The Lord says, take your staff, stretch your hand out over the waters of Egypt. So in this part, it's not only the river, but it's all water throughout the entire land is going to be changed into blood. Even water in ponds and canals. They had irrigation ditches that went out of the river. That's how they watered their fields. All of that is going to be turned into blood. Even water that's sitting in a pot in your house is going to be turned into blood. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff, and he struck the waters of the Nile, and all of the water was turned into blood. The fish die, everything dies. No one can drink the water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. And here's the truth. Not only is it a plague, but this plague is designed to reveal what was already true about Egypt, because blood was already everywhere in Egypt. Egypt looked real nice on the surface, but underneath, Pharaoh was murdering people left and right, however he decided to. His political enemies, kill them. Babies, kill them. Blood was already everywhere in Egypt. God is showing them that their country really is dead. Amazing. But here, and this part might seem impressive, but it's also laughable. The Egyptian wizards, they did the same thing by their secret arts. And Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Now, use your imagination. Think through this for a minute. Moses and Aaron have just turned the entire Nile River into blood. And the fish are all dead. They floated up to the surface. The whole place stinks. All the canals, all the water in the whole nation has been turned into blood. We'll see that the people could get a little water by digging through the dirt. They could dig along the riverbanks and find some water. But then it says the Egyptian wizards did the same thing. How? Now, I don't mean how, like what was their magic. I mean, what water did they even turn into blood? It doesn't seem like there's any water left, does it? They could not have turned a whole river into blood because the river's already blood. They couldn't have turned a pond into blood because the ponds have already been turned into blood. We're talking about something very small in this situation. Like maybe they dug along the riverbanks, got some water in a bowl, and put some food coloring into it so it would turn into blood. So imagine the difference between these two miracles. The Lord turns all the water of the entire nation into actual blood. And the Egyptian magicians, they bring a little bowl to Pharaoh. And they're like, hey, we've got just as much power as those guys. We do. We just turned this whole bowl of water into blood. You can see again, Pharaoh is making a choice. His eyes, his brain should be telling him what's actually true right in front of him. The Lord is in control, not my wizards. It's obviously true. And yet Pharaoh hardens his heart. He would not just he does not, he would not. He chooses not to listen to Moses and Aaron and to the Lord. This is dangerous. If God speaks to you in a way that you can clearly understand, and you keep on refusing to believe that it's God, this is dangerous for any human being. Because if you refuse to believe whatever God is doing, then what can God ever do to change your mind? If you can look at things, like Pharaoh in this case, could look at this incredible miracle and say, no, that's not God. My guys are just as powerful. He can believe his own lies. And if you become like that, and you get used to being like that, believing your own lies, you can get into a state where you can never come back to God. You can never choose to believe. It's not that God is keeping you from it. It's that you simply can't do it anymore. So instead, Pharaoh turns and he goes back into his palace. He did not take even this to heart. The Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the river. Okay, let's go through a few more plagues in succession. We'll see where we are. This pattern continues over and over. There's some break in between the plagues, like God gives Pharaoh a little bit of time to think about this, clean up the river. As soon as the river goes back to normal, Pharaoh wants life to just go back to normal. So the second plague, remember I said there were 3 plagues that are connected to water, right? Second plague is the plague of frogs, clearly connected to water. You would think this is kind of a weird plague, right? Frogs just show up everywhere. The whole river is filled with frogs. This is because frogs were connected with some of the Egyptian gods and with some of their magic spells. Once again, God is speaking not actually primarily to the Israelites. Partly, he's speaking to the Egyptians. Your gods are not gods. Your wizards don't really have power. The frogs, you would think, is this even really that bad? How many people like frogs? Yeah, maybe a little bit. I mean, frogs are kind of gross, but is it really that bad of a plague? Well, what if there were 100 million frogs? Yeah. That's the thing. I think another thing that's being demonstrated here is human beings often think that we're kind of in control and we're able to, make our lives go the way they should go. I have a job, I can go to work, I can get what I need, I can go to the grocery store, I can get the food that I need, I'm doing it all. And we live in that mentality. But the truth is that God could change little tiny things and our whole lives would fall apart. Little tiny things. If you woke up one morning and there was no air, how would that change your life? If you woke up, frogs are a regular occurrence for the Egyptians. There's frogs all over the place, right? But not 10 million. What if you woke up one day and the frogs had multiplied to 100 million? Well, your life falls apart. Right? The Egyptians thought, we're the big, bad, tough rulers of the world. And the Lord's like, oh yeah? Here's some frogs. Now what? And they can't handle the frogs, and they cry out. Oh, in this case, Pharaoh actually comes. I'm not going to read all of these texts for us. There's 7 days. There's usually a week. We think there's probably a week between each plague. It doesn't say that every time. Probably gives Pharaoh a week to get his head together and maybe change his mind. But he calls forth these frogs. Same thing. They're refusing to let go. The Nile's going to teem with frogs. They're going to be everywhere in everybody's houses. And then eventually, what happens is Pharaoh, the magicians in this case, they still are able to do the same thing. The magicians apparently are really good at breeding frogs. But obviously, it's not as big. The land is already full of frogs. How easy is it for the magicians to make it look like they created a bunch of frogs? Give me a break. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, pray to the Lord. So Pharaoh actually has some signs of repentance during all of this. He asks Moses to pray to the Lord and get rid of the frogs. And Moses, God has mercy on him. He says, okay, I'll get rid of the frogs. He gets rid of the frogs. Okay. But as soon as he does, as soon as the frogs are gone, I don't have it on screen, but as soon as the frogs are gone, Pharaoh goes right back to his old tricks. I'm God again, not the Lord. So another plague comes. This is an image of the plague of flies. It's actually not the next plague. The next plague is gnats. So the third plague of the water is little bugs that breed along the shore in the wet sand. Gnats actually might be mosquitoes. For me, it helps me in my imagination to make it a little bit more vivid to think of them as mosquitoes. Imagine the whole land. Imagine all of the lower mainland is just swarming with mosquitoes. What would that be like? It'd be like Winnipeg. Yeah, you'd have to flee into your house. Anyway, once again, you have this image. God, the Egyptians think they're so powerful. Pharaoh thinks he's so powerful. All God has to do is make the bugs breed faster, and the Egyptians can't handle their own life. He's showing them not only that, and remember their spells, their magic spells, are supposed to be able to control bugs and flies, and they can't. So he's showing them their religion is false, their beliefs are false, and also their lives were always in control of the Lord. It was always the Lord upholding them. All he has to do is let the bugs breed a little bit faster. One tiny change, and their whole nation comes to a grinding halt. They can't do anything. So I won't go through each of these plagues individually. First comes the gnats, which are part of the water, but then comes the plague of flies, which now, the only difference really is that now we're dealing with the land, right? And you can see this, it's not written in the text, but it's pretty clear. There are 3 plagues connected to water, then 3 connected to the land, to animals and to human beings who live on the land. So the dust of the ground, in this case, becoming gnats. That's the next thing that happens. Plagues of the land, the plague of flies, right? So this is the first one. And you can see the magicians, even at this point, once we get to the flies and their spells don't work anymore, like these spells that the magicians really believed they had power too. And maybe they did. Maybe they also had spiritual power. But in this moment, the magicians go to Pharaoh and they say, Pharaoh, we've never seen anything like this. You got to understand, this is not just like wizards from another country. This is the finger of God, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh still refuses to listen even to his own wizards, even to his own temple priests. Now he sends the flies swarm on the houses and the officials. I mean, use your imagination. What would that be like? Oh, my goodness. I've never been to Winnipeg. Has anybody experienced gnats, mosquitoes in Winnipeg? Yeah? I do hear there are like swarms of bugs that like can plaster your whole car in Manitoba as well. I don't know. It's just what I've heard. Okay, dense swarms of flies pour over. The 5th plague is the plague of livestock. So in this case, again, you can see it's connected to the land. Now there's going to be more economic consequence to the Egyptians as well, right? This plague is going to kill many of their cattle and their sheep and their goats. Actually, probably mostly cattle. The Egyptians don't like sheep and goats a whole lot. They liked cows. And so this plague comes on and destroys them. Skip through that plague. We don't need to read every piece. And then the plague of boils as well. So this is the first plague that's going to directly attack human beings. You can also think of it as a plague on the land because that's where human beings live. In this case, the image here, you can see Moses and Aaron. He's actually grabbed some dust. And so this plague has a hint now of moving toward the heavens. Because what he does is he takes some dust from the ground and he throws it up in the air. And I think this is another revelation of what the land of Egypt is. The land of Egypt is a disease. It's diseased. Your own land is diseased. When he takes the dust and he throws it in the air, the dust spreads out and then it lands on people and they get boils, like huge gross sores breaking out on their bodies all over the whole country. That's what happens next. And next, we'll wrap up in just a minute, but I do want to show you some of the plagues of the heavens. We'll talk about these more next week when we come back to them. But plagues of the heavens, these are plagues now that come from the sky, these last three. And so the plague of hail, this is a demonstration that it's not the weather god. It's not your dad somehow up in outer space or in the heavens controlling things. It's the Lord who's controlling things. There's the plague of the heavens. Actually, we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to wrap up right there. We'll continue with the plagues of the heavens next week, and we'll see then the final plague is going to be something very different from all the first 9 plagues. And it's going to be something that will reveal how God relates to the world and how God relates to the Israelites. Let's pray. We'll continue in worship.